It is rookie mock draft season. That's right, the best SEO words in the fantasy football world. I'm Alfredo Brown, and today I am joined by, well, one of my usual co-hosts, Dr. Vignesh Doraiswamy, but he's not all that special. Who is special is the guest we have today, Marco Enriquez. Marco is the senior NFL analyst and director of marketing at Dynasty Nerds. You can follow him on Twitter at Marco_14P. And actually with that, Marco, you've also got your new podcast that's coming back. It's not new. It's like being rebooted almost. The 14P podcast. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah. First episode, I think, comes out next Wednesday. So look out for that.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Well, we're so happy to have you on the show, and we got a lot to get into. We got a lot of players that we're going to be talking about here today, so we won't spend too much time, going back and forth. Let's just jump right into this today. We're doing a 2023 Superflex rookie mock draft, okay? The parameters for this, we did 12 teams, 3 rounds, PPR scoring. We kept it pretty simple, and all of this not so much going to be about like getting into the scouting reports and getting too far in depth with these players, but it's kind of just, we're going to have a conversation about this. We're going to get a lay of the land, right? It's still very early in the rookie process. Let's see where these players are getting drafted. We did this with a bunch of people that we don't really know, and we kind of want to see where are these guys falling in their drafts. So without any further ado, let's get it started. All right, so in round 1, we got the 101, and I think this has become the most obvious pick in all of Dynasty football for rookie drafts, and it's Bijan Robinson, the running back for Texas. And Marco, I'm going to throw this to you first. Is there any kind of scenario as a Dynasty manager where Bijan Robinson should not be the 101, regardless of format?
No, no, there just isn't. Even if you have 5 running backs, that's great. Take Bijan Robinson because he's going to be the best one probably. So...
yeah, it's one of those guys, like, you come across a special player, and I just don't think you need to overthink it. There's been a lot of talk about, like, if you're not close to winning, don't take the running back. And it's like, yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. Because this guy has the potential of being one of the absolute best players in fantasy football. And we've seen that younger players, rookies even, are getting the chance to shine earlier in their career. And especially at the running back position, we can see these guys finish top 5 at their position. And I don't understand the mindset where you'd want to turn that down. Even if your team's not close to winning, you build from there. It only takes 1 or 2 players to become really good in fantasy football. Let's get to pick 102 here. And Marco, this was your pick. You went with quarterback CJ Stroud out of Ohio State. And so this might ruffle a couple of feathers. Marco, why did you go Stroud over Bryce Young?
Yeah, so, I have been a big Stroud believer for the past, 2 years here. I've been saying, in this entire offseason, Stroud's my guy over Bryce Young. I think Bryce Young is a very talented player. But for me, when I see the size and football IQ and processing ability of CJ Stroud, I just think that is a more long-term answer at the quarterback position. And if I'm going to give up, a 101, a 102 pick, I want to do it. I want to use that pick on a player that I know has the frame that can hold up. Plus, it's a bonus that he has all the traits that you love to see in a quarterback. He gets knocked sometimes for his mobility, but he was only like 26 yards in his college career behind Bryce Young in rushing. And I don't think Bryce Young's going to blow up the combine either. So I think it's one of those things where he's got that in his tool belt. Sure, he's not Bryce Young athletic, but he could be very much in the line of like an Aaron Rodgers, Trevor Lawrence mobility, which is more than enough for a quarterback who's an accurate passer like he is.
Now, you said tool belt, but if you're going to come onto this show, you always have to make a Batman reference, and it's got to be the utility belt.
Utility belt. There we go.
I just needed to let you know. It's funny, you bring up the rushing, right? And Vig, I'm going to have you talk about these guys in just a moment, but like, we got to remember Justin Fields was not considered a rushing quarterback coming out of Ohio State. He was, just because you don't utilize a skill set in college does not mean that you don't have it. I know we went through this all last offseason with Kenneth Walker and receiving. Vig, here at the 103, we see Bryce Young, the quarterback for Alabama, come off the board. Once again, this is a super flex league, so obviously you see quarterbacks go early. This is the guy that for many draft pundits, he is the QB1, right? Kind of consensus. But I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Vig, you also have CJ Stroud ahead of Bryce Young. Is that correct?
Yes, you are 1,000% correct. And honestly, I didn't want it to come off as me being a homer. I know I work for Ohio State. I'm on the faculty at Ohio State, but for all the reasons Marco said, I just think that when it comes to processing,
you're a doctor. You're a doctor at Ohio
IQ.
State. Don't make it sound like you're a coach.
No, but I'm on faculty. I teach here as well.
There we go.
Okay. I watched a lot of Ohio State football game, and again, I think it comes to that intellectual ability, better football IQ. And like Marco said, his rushing ability, maybe he's not as athletic, but he wasn't that short in terms of rushing yards compared to Bryce Young. I think CJ Stroud is just better equipped. He has a better utility belt in his brain to be an NFL quarterback. I'm not saying it's a huge leap, and I know a lot of people have Young ahead of him, but I don't know, man. Stroud's my guy too.
Yeah, I think that one of the guys that I've seen Stroud compared to is Justin Herbert, and I think it's just because we don't quite know the full capabilities of CJ Stroud, but like Marco said, he's got all the traits that you look for, and it's not that crazy. I have seen people that have CJ Stroud ahead of Bryce Young, and especially it almost seems like it's leaning that way for the fantasy community. So this will be interesting. I have not quite dove into the film yet for the quarterbacks, but they're definitely the toughest position to evaluate here in the pre-draft process. And one of the things that I kind of want to let speak for these players is going to be the draft capital and the team they end up on. And we'll touch more on that in just a little bit. At the 104, we see Jahmyr Gibbs, the running back from Alabama, come off the board. Big time receiving threat. He may not be looked at as the most natural runner, but Jahmyr Gibbs comes off the board at the 104. And then I took my pick here at 105. I went with Jaxon Smith-Njigba, a wide receiver from Ohio State. And JSN, man, like I think he's just a much better athlete than people give him credit for. And watching his film, dude's got better hips than Shakira. Like he is able to get in and out of his breaks so smooth and so quick. For a guy who doesn't look super fast on film, he is able to change direction so fast. And it's just, man, it's just beautiful. It is. I know it's one of those overused phrases, but it's poetry in motion when he's out there. Hands are really strong. He's got excellent ball skills. He can attack the ball while it's in the air. And one thing I heard of from some of the bigger pundits out there is drops, right? And the drop rate's really not all that bad. 5.9% drop rate, same as Justin Jefferson coming out of LSU. And there's something that we talked about it last offseason. Like, we got to stop trying to make drops a thing, right? It's usually a causality type thing based on target volume. The more receptions you get, the more times you get targeted, the more likely you are to have drops, okay? And it's unless it becomes one of those habitual things that you see on tape over and over, I don't think we need to blow it out of proportion. Now, at the 106, the next wide receiver comes off the board. It's Jordan Addison, the wide receiver from USC. I think that Jordan Addison and another player that I will talk about later might have the best hands in this class right now. My comp for Jordan Addison is Calvin Ridley. I think a lot of other people have said that as well. And that's the thing with player comps. They start to make their way around universally. But Addison, man, I don't think that he's super elite at anything, but he's really good at a lot of different stuff. And he's fast enough to get the deep ball. He's good at tracking the deep ball. I love that he's played in two different offenses. And I think there's going to be a lot of talk about like chicken or egg. He played with two of the top quarterbacks, I guess, for in those years, right? Like Caleb Williams this past year, and then before that, Kenny Pickett, who came out of Pitt. So there's going to be a lot of talk about that. But he's a smart route runner. He plays hide and seek with the defensive back so well. I posted that on my Twitter the other day, and I think there's a really good shot that we see him go in the top 15. And he'll probably, I think, be the top wide receiver selected because of all the hullabaloo about Jaxon Smith-Njigba not playing a lot during his final year there at Ohio State. Vig, I know you also got to watch Jordan Addison a bit. What did you see when you were watching Jordan Addison?
I feel like I'm just a copycat guy today. But honestly, you said it well. He finds himself open all the time. He finds these blind spots. He leaves these DBs in his like wake. They're like scrambling, trying to see where he is. And I think it's sort of telling, right? That two different quarterbacks, kind of different systems. He did really well. I think that's just because even if he's not elite at everything, he's so good at so many things that he will find a role no matter where he goes. And he's just always wide open. And I think like if there's a single trait that matters the most, it's always wide. It's like watching Travis Kelce, right? I'm like, how is that dude always wide open even when people are guarding him? I think that's what you could see Addison do. He's just going to be open with no one around him when the ball comes his way.
Yeah, I think that the NFL is getting better at utilizing players that necessarily aren't that traity, right? Like you can be under 6 feet and under 200 pounds and still not run a 4.3, and the NFL knows how to use you now, and offenses are getting more creative. So I think that'll be interesting to see how the rest of this draft process plays out for him. At pick 107 and 108, we see the quarterback 3 and 4, whatever order you might have them in, come off the board here, and that's Anthony Richardson, quarterback out of Florida, and Will Levis, the quarterback out of Kentucky. Now, it seems like Anthony Richardson is kind of wildly beloved by the fantasy community for his rushing floor, and Will Levis is just unanimously hated, the quarterback out of Kentucky, by the fantasy community. And so, Marco, I'm going to throw this back to you here, man. We've got our 4 quarterbacks now off the board, all within the first 8 picks. This is a super flex mock draft. How do you rank these 4 quarterbacks as of now without an NFL team?
Yeah, so honestly, how this draft went, This isn't how I would. I should say this. This is how I would take them in a fantasy football draft. The order they went in: C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young, Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, and that's the order for me. And the only reason I think Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, true quarterback right now, Will Levis is probably better, but we're playing fantasy football. And if I'm going to take someone in a super flex league, I'm going to go and I'm going to shoot for the stars. I'm going to take Anthony Richardson because he could develop into a very elite fantasy football quarterback, where Will Levis, I don't think he has that ceiling, and he's already starting probably at a similar, if not slightly higher floor than Anthony Richardson. So those two are, I prefer Richardson just because it's fantasy. If I'm just looking at NFL talent, I would probably go Levis. And then you guys know what I already said with Stroud and Young.
So I want to go off script here for a second, okay? And both of you guys, I'm surprising you here with this, but so this is actually something that I've seen in a Dynasty league. And would you rather have one of these two quarterbacks, Anthony Richardson out of Florida or Will Levis out of Kentucky, or would you rather trade that pick away and get Trey Lance at the moment? Marco, I'm going to start this with you because I know there's a lot, man. Like Trey Lance, the term that I've heard is that his value is very volatile right now. It's very delicate. Would you prefer one of these rookies, or would you rather have Trey Lance?
I would rather have Trey Lance. And I'm not a huge Trey Lance truther, to be honest. Like, I think he's going to be a fine NFL quarterback. I think he's going to be a decent fantasy quarterback. But I think he's already a better player than either of these two quarterbacks.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that. And Vig, something that I think obviously changes the value for these quarterbacks, and something that I spoke about, right, in terms of how I'm going to value them, is their landing spot. And I think that people get into this argument every offseason in terms of rookie drafts, is how much does landing spot really matter and whatever. For the quarterback, it matters a lot. Are they going to be in a good environment with a good coach and a good offense and something that lends to their skill set? So Vig, it doesn't necessarily have to be based on the quarterback, but what are some of the best landing spots for these quarterbacks that you say, okay, if any of these guys end up at this team, he's going to be set?
Well, I don't know that anyone's going to be set, but, we talked about earlier, I think you and I were just chatting at some point, and I talked about, the other rivals within my division with the Jags, the Colts and Texans, both seem like decent landing spots for any of these quarterbacks. Obviously, like if I do not want Stroud or Young to go to the Colts or Texans because I just want the Jags to do well. But outside of the Colts, I think depending on what happens in Las Vegas with the Raiders and even the Seahawks, I see thrown around a lot. I know that's on our show sheet because I'm really wanting to think about what are you going to do with the Seahawks. And I'm not convinced that these guys are going to like absolutely be way better than Geno Smith. And going back to what Marco said, I just think Trey Lance is better than both of these guys, whether it's Anthony Richardson or Will Levis. But it's hard to say, honestly. Landing spot matters so much. It depends on who the coach is, what sort of weapons they have at their disposal. What is their scheme? Is it going to work well? Like Anthony Richardson, I know he's going at the 107 for his rushing floor, but the dude had like a 50% completion rate and less than 50 in like 4 or 5 games. If you look at what he did last year in Florida. So, he's going to need a lot of coaching and a lot of like help to get ready to play in the NFL. So I know we're drafting them at the 107, 108 when it comes to Superflex, but like, are any of these guys even going to be reliable starters for us next year? I don't know. And I don't think so, to be honest. I don't know. What do y'all think?
So I'm going to jump in here really quick because, what I think is interesting is that we have now returned to this foregone conclusion that we've got 4 guys that are probably going to go in the top 10, 12, 15 picks of the NFL draft, when last year, like, there was people fighting all offseason that Malik Willis could be the 2nd overall pick. And then, like, dude fell so far. And I'm not saying that's something that should happen here, but I think we're really writing off that possibility. Marco, I mean, is this something where you think that all these guys have to go? And I know we're spending a lot of time on quarterbacks. This is a super flex mock draft. Is this something where you think that all these guys are going to get top 15, top 20 draft or even first round draft capital?
I do think that all 4 of these guys probably will go in the first round. I think if anyone drops, it will be Anthony Richardson. And we could actually see Will Levis go much earlier than we're seeing right now. But I also think that in super flex leagues, you don't need to prioritize these guys like they're some elite quarterback because of what we just talked about. Situation matters for these 2 players. It doesn't really matter for the other 2. And that's why, truthfully, if you're going to pick one of these quarterbacks, I'm not going before like 110 because there's better talent out there that's more of a sure thing in my eyes than these 2 quarterbacks. Super flex or not.
All right, so let's finish out the rest of the first round here. At the 109, we had Quentin Johnston, the wide receiver out of TCU. And this is a player that I've seen be the wide receiver 1 on some rankings and some draft boards. For me, he is not that. I have Johnson not even as wide receiver 2, but I have him in my whole second tier of wide receivers. I don't have him in that same tier as Smith-Njigba or Addison. Marco, where does Quentin Johnston rank for you in terms of the wide receiver landscape?
Yeah, so I'm right there with you. He is in my tier 2 of wide receivers. Right now, he's my wide receiver 3. And a guy we're going to talk about later might actually jump him once we kind of have the combine and the draft and we see how things go. But Quentin Johnston, a lot of people think, oh, he's this physical freak. He's got all of these traits. And while he does, they're ignoring that there are very glaring red flags in his tape. And I think that's something that a lot of people, when you see a physical athlete like him who just wins physically at every level, they say this is going to be the guy. And if he could just translate even a little bit of this, he's going to be a superstar. But that's also how you select major busts in the NFL and in your fantasy draft. So I don't think he's going to be a bust, but there's red flags here, and I don't think he deserves to be in the conversation, like you said, with JSN and Addison especially.
Yeah, whether you're a pretend GM running your fantasy team or an NFL GM running, a real team, we have seen so many live and die by the sword of the dreaded potential, right? And that's how you end up with those bust picks, like you mentioned. Let's finish up round 1 here. At the 110, we had Zach Charbonnet, the running back out of UCLA. I'm going to say it French like that every single time. Maybe French-Canadian. I'm not even sure. And then at 111, we've got Zach Evans, the running back out of Ole Miss. And then Vig, here's another fun last name to say. At the 112, you went with Kayshon Boutte, the wide receiver out of LSU. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I believe I am. I listened to his name a couple times. It's just fun to say. So you went with Kayshon Boutte, wide receiver out of LSU. Vig, talk to me about your pick here.
Oh, man. So, we did this draft 4 days ago, and as Alfredo knows and Marco is finding out in real time, this was the week that I've been watching the wide receivers, and I didn't get to watch all of them. So I will say a lot of people actually probably think that going as the 4th wide receiver is a little low for him. Some people like him a lot more. I actually think I picked him a little high. So my big lesson here is be prepared. Know what you're doing before you did. I should have looked at some other experts like Big Board or other people's rankings. I actually think that Downs and Flowers, who we'll be talking about later in hindsight, are probably a little better as far as, what they'll do in the league and for fantasy, at least early on. But I do think, there was an argument to be made that Kayshon could be the rookie wide receiver 1. That was something that was being talked about all the time. We talked about how Pickens dropped and how Jameson Williams for injury, how these guys dropped, but they were all in the conversation as the wide receiver 1. And I think Kayshon's out there too. The guy can do it all. He can, he can be in the slot. You can make him be the guy sort of on the outside. He can stretch the field. He's good with yards after the catch. But I think the big red flag that, is that this last year he struggled a little bit relatively. LSU changed their scheme. So it's a little hard to say. So I think big picture, what I think is that this is someone that I really, when I think about landing spot versus drafting based on talent, I think the guy's got the talent, but I really want to see where he ends up. Alfredo and I talk about, so Marco, we'd love to hear your input actually. I don't love drafting until after the actual NFL draft because I love the whole planting your flag on someone's talent, but we've seen that bite us in the rear end. I love just waiting for the landing spot so I can make a better, more informed decision. And that's what I think I need to do with Kayshon right now.
Yeah, I honestly agree with not drafting till after the NFL draft. I think there's no problem with doing it before, but you'd be drafting with just an incomplete picture because, as you evaluate talent, as you build out prospect profiles for these guys, the NFL draft is a part of that. And as much as we as analysts and people who want to break down talent think that we're really, really good at it, the NFL tells you and gives you a huge hint in the draft of what they think of the player, which kind of matters more than what any analyst is going to say about a player. So,
all right, gentlemen, let's recap round 1 here. At pick 1, we had Bijan Robinson, the running back out of Texas. At the second pick, we had CJ Stroud, quarterback out of Ohio State. At pick 3, Bryce Young, quarterback out of Alabama. Pick 4, Jahmyr Gibbs, running back from Alabama. Pick 5, Jaxon Smith-Njigba. At 6, we had Jordan Addison, the wide receiver from USC. At 7 and 8, we had Anthony Richardson and Will Levis, the final 2 quarterbacks for that top tier kind of come off the board there. At 109, we had Quentin Johnston, the wide receiver from TCU. And then at 10 and 11, we had Zach Charbonnet and Zach Evans, the two Zachs, the running backs, come off the board there at the end. And then Vig closed us out with Kayshon Boutte, the wide receiver out of LSU. Are you looking to build your dynasty? Football Guys is here to help. Our 2023 Rookie Draft Guide will help you identify the players you need to dominate your dynasty leagues with in-depth statistics, rankings, and expert film-based analysis on 120 NFL prospects. We'll help you discover the sleepers and stars of the 2023 draft class, understand the context behind college production, and gain the edge you need to win. The first edition of the Rookie Draft Guide is available now, and it's 100% free. This guide is packed with information and analysis on 120 NFL prospects, each profile including scouting reports, strengths and weaknesses, ideal fits for NFL schemes and teams, historical stats, and way more. Plus, you're going to get big board cheat sheets for both Superflex and single quarterback dynasty leagues. You can download all 120 plus pages of the first edition of the draft guide now 100% free by going to footballguys.com/rookie guide. Now, Football Guys Elite and Hall of Fame subscribers will also receive updated post-combine and post-draft editions of the guide with updated stats, additional analysis, draft strategies, athletic scores, and way more. Head to footballguys.com/rookie guide to get your free rookie guide and start dominating your dynasty league today. Now let's get into round 2 here, where this, I think, is still pretty messy, round 2. I think round 1, for the most part, we all kind of have an understanding of who those players are going to be, and I don't know if there's going to be too much shifting there. Maybe just a little bit in the order, right? But round 2 is where things are still very messy. At pick 201, we saw Kendre Miller come off the board here, the running back out of TCU. And Kendre Miller's a guy that I actually really, really like at first glance. When I put on his film, I fell in love with the kid. I think that he's one of those guys that he scares me, but he excites me. And I think it's because he doesn't have one of those things. The NFL is kind of trending towards this running back by committee approach. And it really helps for a running back to have an elite trait, something that will just keep them on the field, right? You either want to be that bulldozer of a running back or that pass catching running back, or you got to be really good at both of those things to stay on the field all the time, like a Bijan Robinson or a Saquon Barkley. I think Kendre Miller is one of those guys that has the ability to be on the field for a while, but we haven't seen him catch passes. And so that's something that I think is going to be interesting. Is the skill set not there? Is this another Kenneth Walker that he's a good runner, can catch passes? He just wasn't asked to do it. So I think that'll be an interesting thing to note as we get closer to the NFL draft. But Kendre Miller comes off the board here at the 201. And then at the 202, Marco, your pick here, you took Sean Tucker, running back out of Syracuse. And Marco, I got to be real with you, man. This is going to be our first time disagreeing on something. I am not as high on Sean Tucker as you are. And I think what I've noticed is that it's the people that have been looking at this rookie class for a while are still pretty high on Sean Tucker. So please, let's go. Give me the elevator pitch. Convince me why I should be considering, or why fantasy managers should be considering Sean Tucker at the 202.
Yeah, so when I look at Sean Tucker, I see a physical runner who has elite speed. He can make an impact in the game in all phases or all levels of the offense. I think pass catching is one that he's developed in this last season for Syracuse, but it was something that's like not necessarily a strength for him. But it's enough where I have less concerns about Sean Tucker as a pass catcher than I do a guy that we just talked about in Kendre Miller. And especially when you look at fantasy football drafts, when you're looking at rookie drafts, the second round is where I'm more inclined to draft for ceiling rather than floor, because Sean Tucker is one of those guys who, outside of Bijan, he probably has the highest ceiling of all the running backs. But if I'm being honest, of those top running backs, he's probably got one of the lower floors.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point here, and something we pride ourselves on at the show is being able to teach and give lessons to the audience, not just say, hey, here's what we think. And so that's a great lesson right there, right? Is you kind of want to think of what your strategy is going to be going into round 2. If you know that these later rounds of your rookie draft can be a mess, Well, and draft for ceiling. You draft that volatility because at that point it's a 50-50 shot anyways, man. Like just go for it. The draft is a crapshoot, whether it's the real NFL draft or dynasty rookie draft. So you might as well go for the ceiling. So I like that plan there going into your rookie drafts. Let's take a look at pick 203, and it was Devon Achane, the running back out of Texas A&M. This is, I'll just be really quick on him. This is a guy that has world-class track speed. You put him on the field with guys like Tyreek Hill and all these fast players in the NFL, and I think Devon Achane is right there, 100-meter champion, if I'm not mistaken. At the 204, we see Michael Mayer, tight end from Notre Dame, come off the board, and tight end is a position where there's a lot of good tight ends, but I've seen them all over the place. And so that will be something very interesting. I think what we definitely want to pay attention to, and just kind of a quick lesson here, is tight end. We want to pay attention to the guys that have the good athletic profiles. And typically what you've seen is that the tight ends with the good athletic profiles are the ones that will produce for fantasy. And sometimes that's not always the case either. You got to remember, tight ends are going to take quite a while. So don't be too disappointed if your tight end does not produce in year one. We get to pick 205. And this is where I selected a player that is one of my favorite in this class, and I'm developing a crush on him. It is Josh Downs, the wide receiver from North Carolina. And we all kind of spoke briefly on him moments ago, just mentioning the names, but he's one of my favorite players. The footwork, the spatial awareness is just incredible. Whether he is in going up against man coverage, zone coverage, whatever it is, he's able to create separation. He's able to find the soft spots in the coverage. The hands, I do believe, could be the absolute best in this class. Surprisingly good on contested catches for a guy who's not very big. To me, he's kind of a smaller, faster version of a Jaxon Smith-Njigba. I think that he can easily transition into a high volume role here in the NFL. The thing to look out for is what's going to be the draft capital. You know, I've seen some people have him as high as their wide receiver 3, and then I've seen him at other angles being like the wide receiver 6 or 7. And, you know, I think that if he gets round 2 NFL draft capital, that could be great for him. I've even seen some things in low end of round 1, but if he starts to slide down, it's just going to be something to note. It doesn't necessarily make a player, you know, invalid for your team. Now let's take a look at some of these other picks that came up here. At the 206, we see Zay Flowers, wide receiver from Boston College, a guy who he's going to be heavily debated along with Josh Downs. Then at 207, Tank Bigsby, running back from Auburn. 208, another tight end comes off the board, Dalton Kincaid, tight end out of Utah. And then at the 209, this has been a very buzzworthy player, Jalen Hyatt, wide receiver out of Tennessee. And this is a guy whose film that I just started watching the other day. Lance Zierlein of NFL Network put Jalen Hyatt at 12th overall to Houston in his mock draft. And I think that sent waves across the fantasy football community, the NFL community, everyone's like, whoa, okay, we got to take notice. Daniel Jeremiah, one of the most, if not the most respected name in all of NFL draft media, has him ranked as his number 23 prospect, ahead of every wide receiver that we've mentioned here, except Jordan Addison. It's rumored that Hyatt is going to run a 4.31, maybe even better than that. Marco, what is going on? If Jalen Hyatt comes out, and there's plenty to talk about on the film, and we'll get into that in later episodes, but if he comes out and runs a 4.31 and like ends up in the first round, how much does this affect your rankings?
Okay, I'm going to be super honest with you. If he gets first round draft capital, it helps. But I don't care if he runs a 4.31. I don't care at all. Perfect. The reason I think if he goes in the first round, it just tells us that the Raiders exist. You know, like that's a Raiders pick. Jalen Hyatt is a good college football player, the best college football player you could say this, or wide receiver this year, you know, but the reality is there are tons of questions. Is he going to be able to deal with press coverage in the NFL? We don't know what his release package looks like because he played in the spread offense. We don't know if he's that good of a route runner. I don't think he is. Every year, a fast wide receiver goes in the first round. It's usually the Raiders. And every year, that player is typically a letdown. So I am really, really not going to be swayed by Jalen Hyatt running well in the combine because that's what he was always going to do. I'm not going to give him bonus points for doing what he was supposed to do.
Viggy, you got to watch a little bit of Jalen Hyatt as well. And you seem to be very much in agreement here with Marco, that Jalen Hyatt is not a guy that you're super high on.
I love Marco. Marco, can you just like replace Alfredo and the two? Like, no, but yes. First off, I don't really care about the combine very much either. Like, we've seen what he does on a real field. Why do I care when he's running when there's no one around? That's always sort of been my philosophy. I know a lot of people look down on that, but like, again, Tennessee manufactured their scheme and plays around this guy. Like, his route tree was very underdeveloped. Yes, he's going to be fast. If he runs a 4.31, great. That's what I expect him to do. I think there were some concerns about like, BMI and size, and I think we can put that to rest. That's not what I'm worried about. I just think that I love the Raiders pick sort of like story here. I just think that this guy's going to need a lot of work to be successful in the NFL. Speed alone, we have seen over the past few years, does not mean everything. I don't remember everything else, Alfredo. I sent you a giant text today after watching like 20 minutes of what Hyatt was doing. And I think he can be impressive. I just don't know how all of this translates to the NFL. My big thing is, route tree needs a lot of work, and I really don't know how he's going to be in like when he's not in this spread scheme that is meant for him. Like, they like manufactured plays for this guy.
Yeah, Vig, when you sent me that text, it was the meme of like, "Hey, I'm not reading all that, but good for you," or "I'm sorry that happened." That's how I felt when you sent me that long. Like, dude, give me some bullet points next time, okay? You're being like my parents. Like, don't send me a long paragraph via text, okay? That's not cool.
Well, really quickly too, I feel like when you watch, like, if just the casual fan goes and watch Jalen Hyatt highlights on YouTube, what you're seeing is like weirdly the most boring Biletnikoff Award winner highlights I've ever seen, and it doesn't make sense.
I felt like I was back watching high school film, like when I was looking at high school players, where it's just the fastest guy on the field.
Yep,
had broken coverage in front of him, was wide open, caught a ball with nobody within 20 yards, and was able just to kind of trot into the end zone. Now, there's definitely some things that you like here about Jalen Hyatt, the speed. I don't think he's as bad of a route runner as some might make him out to be. I just don't think that he has had that opportunity to run a variety of routes. It's obviously concerning that the production happened this year and not in the other years, and it took a scheme change. And Marco, something you pointed out is there's a lot of weird stacking going on where they would almost hide Jalen Hyatt behind other wide receivers so he couldn't get pressed the line. They would bring him in motion a lot to try to get him up to full speed as quickly as possible, and something we saw the Dolphins do a lot with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle this year. So yeah, I think this is going to be a very polarizing prospect for a lot of people. But Marco, something you mentioned is that if he does get first round draft capital or top 20 draft capital, like it was for Lance Zierlein here, I think it's something we're going to have to take notice of, especially, if he ends up like on one of these teams. Like I've seen him get mocked to the Los Angeles Chargers. If they cut Keenan Allen and they end up with a guy like Jalen Hyatt in the first round, like things could get really crazy for us in our rookie drafts. All right, let's close out the second round here. Another Tennessee guy comes off the board at the 210. We see Hendon Hooker, the quarterback from Tennessee. At the 211, Eric Gray, the running back from Oklahoma. And Vig, real quickly here, you took Rashee Rice, the wide receiver out of SMU, at the 212 in 30 seconds or less. Why did you take Rashee Rice?
Second round, I went for ceiling, just what Marco said. I think he's one of the better SMU prospects we had. The guy's a little on the slower side, but he always has these big, stretching the field, downfield sort of plays. He's pretty decent, I think, for, getting those yards after the catch and running after the catch. Route tree was a little limited, but I just think he sort of, depending on where he goes, he has sort of big play potential. That's my summary of Rashee Rice.
All right, let's recap round two here. We saw Kendry Miller go off the board at the 201. Sean Tucker, running back for Syracuse, at the 202. Devon Achane, running back from Texas A&M, go at the 203. Michael Mayer at the 204. Josh Downs, my love, at the 205. Zay Flowers at the 206. Tank Bigsby at 207. Dalton Kincaid at the 208. Jalen Hyatt, the most polarizing man in the draft, at 209. Hendon Hooker at the 210, Eric Gray at 211, and then Vig went for the ceiling with Rashee Rice, the wide receiver out of SMU, at the 212. Gentlemen, we are getting into our final round here, the third round. All right, stretch your legs, take a deep breath. We're going to get through this. We're almost done. Round three here at the 301. We see another Tennessee Volunteer come off the board, and Cedric Tillman, a guy who produced not this past season, but the year before that, and then things kind of shifted towards Jalen Hyatt this year. Now, Marco, at the 302, you took another running back who, man, I might fight you a little bit on this again. I'm not super high on Izzy Abanikanda, the running back out of Pitt. So let's do another one of those elevator pitches in 30 seconds or less. Why, as a fantasy manager, should I be drafting Izzy Abanikanda with my third round selection here?
Yeah, I think when the combine's over, he won't be a third-round selection. I think he's going to be higher than that. I've got him as a top 5 running back. I think he's got elite traits when you look at his athleticism, his athleticism and size combination. His contact balance is great. I think really the only questions are he doesn't have a lot of wiggle when he runs. He's a little bit more straight line than I was hoping for when I broke down his tape. But ultimately, I think his positives outweigh his negatives, and he just turned 20 like 3 or 4 months ago, so he's really, really young. So in Dynasty, if you're taking him in the 3rd round, I think it's a nice ceiling pick there.
All right, really quick, in 30 seconds or less, Vig, did your microphone fall off its stand and did you catch it midair? Is that what happened?
That is exactly what happened. I knocked it off entirely. I caught it in midair, and I am still actively holding it. You just can't tell.
Get this on the scouting report. Hands for Vig, 10 out of 10. Awesome. Wow. I was so impressed by it. We couldn't stop at that moment, but I had to come back to it. All right. At the 303, the next pick here, we see a running back come off the board. It's Tyjae Spears, running back out of Tulane, a guy who just absolutely, if there are winners and losers of the Senior Bowl practice week, he was an absolute winner. I already really love Tyjae Spears. Kind of the way you spoke about Izzy Abanikanda, Marco. Tyjae Spears is that guy for me. I love him. He's a top 5 running back for me right now. Man, it's just, there is a beautiful creativity to the way he runs. I think that he is one of those guys that moves so well laterally, and that's something that I really look for, because I think a lot of people talk about vision for running backs, the anticipation of these running lanes, but if you can't actually get there, it doesn't matter how well you look at it, right? It's kind of like looking at your favorite vacation destination. If you can't actually get there, it doesn't matter. Like, it's just a dream. And for me, like, that's the thing with running backs. Like, they might have good vision, good anticipation, but if they can't actually get there, I'm not super excited about that player. And Tyjae Spears was a guy that, man, every time he touches that ball, he is taken off to the races. And that's what happened in his games. That's what you see at Senior Bowl practice. I think that he's one of those guys that answered a lot of questions about his weight, weighing in at 205. And I think that was a big worry for people. So I think he's going to be one of those guys that he went at the 303 here for us. I think we're going to see him be one of those guys get pushed up draft boards quite a bit, especially in those non-Superflex formats. At the 304, we see Raheem Jarrett, the wide receiver from Maryland, come off the board. And then at 305, what's up? Represent Miami. Marco, if you didn't know, that's our area code down here, 305, baby. I took Rashawn Johnson, the running back out of Texas. And this is another guy I really like. Obviously, I drafted him. But through my first run of film, Johnson's my RB7 right now, and I think that he is hilariously underrated by people who are just saying that he is just, he was the backup to Bijan Robinson. He's not a full-time guy. Do not be deterred by the backup role thing. Like, we have seen a lot of players come out of college that were the back. Josh Jacobs was a backup, and he lit the fantasy world on fire. At 225 pounds, Rashawn Johnson is an absolute beast. He's got speed to get to the outside. It shows up on his film. He can make guys miss even in tight spaces. He's not the most laterally inclined, but he's got some passing down ability. If he runs well at the combine, he continues to test well, and he continues to do well in these interviews, I would not be surprised if he is a day 2 pick in the NFL draft, and might surprise a lot of people with his draft capital.
He was he was the backup to like one of the best running back prospects we've ever seen. So that's a terrible argument.
Yeah, it's he. If anything, to me, it's a positive that he was able to take touches away from probably the best player in the country, and that's how we got to look at it. Because if you take a player like if you took Rashawn Johnson and you put him on any one of these other teams, right? You put him on a Tennessee and LSU or any one of these teams that might have utilized him in a tough conference. We might have been talking about him as a Heisman candidate. We might have been talking about him as the number 2 running back in this class. And I think there's a lot that's being lost in the sauce, so to speak, here with Rashawn Johnson. And I think the more of that is going to come to light as we continue to go through this draft process. All right, let's move along here. At the 306, we see the biggest man at the tight end position, Darnell Washington. I believe he's like 7'8", 380 pounds, something like that. He is Andre the Giant in a Georgia jersey. At 307, we see Marvin Mims, wide receiver from Oklahoma. At 308, Chase Brown, running back from Illinois, a guy who did not have a good Senior Bowl week by all accounts. At the 309, Luke Musgrave, very athletic tight end out of Oregon State. At the 310, we see Xavier Hutchinson, a little bit of an older wide receiver out of Iowa State. And then at 311, a guy who, another fun name to say, is Puka Nacua, the wide receiver out of BYU, who surprised and impressed a lot of people down at the Senior Bowl. Vig, at the 312, you took a player that I was surprised was here. I'm not really high. I'm not really high on him, but Kenny McIntosh, the running back out of Georgia, he possesses such a good receiving ability. I was surprised to see him get to nearly the 4th round of a rookie draft. Talk to me a little bit about Kenny McIntosh.
Honestly, I picked him because he was the best player available. I know people talk about, like, should you fill holes? Should you take the best? I always think in rookie dynasty drafts, you just take the best player available. Don't try to fill your holes. Use free agency for that. Trade for that. I was surprised. This guy's like somewhere in the mid-20s on a lot of people's rankings and boards, and he was available at the 36th pick. But I kind of like him. You know, is he really going to be productive early on? I don't know, but he is so athletic. He, you know, when he is in open space, he is like hard to bring down, and he's really, really dangerous. I could see him maybe carving himself like a special teams role early on. Pretty decent hands overall, but man, his big knock is this guy just does not let plays develop. At least from what I saw, his vision was pretty poor. He like runs into holes that don't exist. Would need a lot of coaching. But again, he was sort of, I'm like, how is this guy available at pick 36? It was a pretty easy pick for me to end off our little mock draft here.
Yeah, he's one of these guys that when I watched him, I compared him to Rachaad White with my film analysis of him last year. I didn't think Rachaad White was a very good runner. I didn't think that he displayed a lot of vision, but he displayed some pass catching prowess, and I think that was something that gave him a lot of fantasy value, especially with Tom Brady this last year. And you know, we find that these guys that maybe they're not the best runners, they end up with fantasy value. And I think Vig, that's a good pick here at the end of the 3rd round. Let's recap that 3rd round really quickly here. We got Cedric Tillman, the wide receiver out of Tennessee. Izzy Abanikanda taken by Marco here at the 302. Tyjae Spears at the 303. Raheem Jarrett at the 304. I took Rashawn Johnson at the 305. What up, MIA? At the 306, we took Darnell Washington, tight end from Georgia. 307, Marvin Mims, wide receiver from Oklahoma. 308, Chase Brown, running back from Illinois. At the 309, Luke Musgrave, tight end from Oregon State. 310, Xavier Hutchinson, wide receiver, Iowa State. 311, Puka Nacua, the wide receiver from BYU. And then Vig closed us out with Kenny McIntosh, the running back out of Georgia, at the 312. Well, boys, that is it for us today. Marco, thank you so much for joining us. I know you got the 14P podcast coming out. Can you just remind everybody when that is going to be debuting again?
Yeah, so it's coming out next Wednesday is the first episode. I've got Eric Moody from ESPN jumping on with me. So we're going to have a great conversation. So make sure to stay tuned for that. And you could follow me on Twitter for all the release info because it's the podcast URL isn't out there yet.
Awesome. Yeah, great guest there with Eric Moody. Thank you so much, Marco. Vig, as always, it was awful to record with you. Thank you, everybody, for listening all the way through. That's it for us today. We've got no episode next week. We're going to be taking the week off as I go to Las Vegas for the FSGA conference, but we'll be back on Thursday, February 23rd. I'll be joined by Dave Kluge and our newest co-host of the show, Joey Wright, going to be joining me for that episode. All right, so for myself, Dr. Vig, and Marco Enriquez, adios.